Thank you all for coming here tonight. So my name is Reginald Parson, and I'm the Deputy Director with the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Program, and I'll be moderating and leading tonight's webinar with the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition. On the call, Sarah Price and Belinda Donovan are wonderful partners at Ethos that will be assisting with us on this public education campaign. And Luke Monahan is also present on the call, who is the director of the program. We are extremely pleased that you are joining us here today. And I would like to share that today's event will be recorded and posted on the department's webpage on paid family and medical leave. So right now at this time, I would like to thank the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition again for being a great partner and working with us to host this webinar. So at this time, I will take it off to someone from the coalition if they are available. So if they can please raise their hand and we'll definitely recognize them. No one present on the call, but we'll definitely come back to you. And then also too, if there are any individuals from the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Benefits Authority, please raise your hand and we will definitely recognize you. And seeing no hands. All right, so, and again, we're more than happy to, before the end of this webinar, recognize anyone from the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition or the authority. So today, I will provide a brief overview of the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave Program and some key information to know as we continue to move forward with implementation of this very new and exciting program. After the overview, we will answer questions. And at this time, we will certainly, as I'm going through the presentation, encourage you to put those questions into the Q&A chat. And my wonderful partner here, Sophia, will be handing those questions off to me in real time. But again, if you do have any questions throughout the event, please do not hesitate to reach out. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen to begin the presentation. So please stay with us for 1 second. Patience. Okay. All right, so to begin with a general overview. So this law was passed by the state legislature and signed by Governor Mills in July of 2023 that made Maine the 13th state in the country to adopt a paid family and medical leave program. This law will provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave for family leave, medical leave, safe leave, or leave that's related to a family member's upcoming military deployment. And essentially, this law will apply to many employees and employers in the state of Maine. So this is a pretty broad reaching law, with the exception of the federal government, as they received an exemption in the statute that this law would not apply to them or their employees. So to talk about the reasons for leave, so again, you can take it for family, medical, safe leave, or military deployment. I'm going to take a little bit of time to kind of explain some of the general examples. So this program is available for folks who are maybe looking to expand their family, either through birth, adoption, or fostering, or you are someone who is taking care of a loved one with a serious health condition. For medical leave, this is to deal with your own specific medical needs. And then for safe leave, this applies to the employee or the employee's family member who may be needing to stay safe after abuse or violence. And then finally, related to military deployment, it's for leave related to a family member, which could be a spouse who's an active duty service member, and they are heading off to potentially overseas or wherever they're called upon, and that spouse needs to take time off to handle that transition. So that's one general example of military deployment. So here's what you need to expect not only in 2025, but in 2026. So beginning January of 2025, payroll deductions will begin for this program. And this is the reason why we're doing these webinars, to just really inform the public about the program, so that, you know, when you're looking at your pay stub in January or sometime next year, you will hopefully have a better understanding of why that took place. And that is to, you know, help pay for the paid family and medical leave program. And I'll kind of go more into what the contribution requirements are in the later slide. But things that we need to do on our end is to implement the rules for this program. And so we're working extremely hard to meet the statutory deadline of January 1st, 2025. And then also in the winter or early 2025, and this is something that you as an employee doesn't necessarily have to worry about, but we'll be launching the Maine Paid Leave Portal, which is where every employer in the state of Maine, including out-of-state employers with Maine employees, will have to register for the portal, and that's an opportunity for them to also, you know, apply for a private plan exemption. But again, as an employee, you do not have to worry about this. And then finally, in May of 2026, benefits will go live for the program. And so hopefully, you know, if there is any questions around what's the gap between January and May, we're definitely happy to answer those questions. So to talk about premiums for the program, again, beginning in January of 2025, these payroll deductions are going to begin. And so what does that look like for you as an employee? So essentially, the contribution rate for this program is 1% of an individual's wage rate that can be split between the employee and the employer. Individuals such as self-employed individuals and tribal governments can elect coverage into the program. And so in that particular instance, they would be paying 50% of the premium rate. So beginning in January 2025, what is this payroll deduction going to look like for me? So if you are a worker who's working for an employer with 15 or more employees, we use just a general example of, you know, $1 million a year payroll, which for that employer will be 1%. So the employer will be paying 0.5% of that, and the employees will also be paying 0.5%. So beginning in January, no more than 0.5% should be coming out of your pay for this program. And if you are working for an employer with less than 15 employees, you might see that premium rate look a little different. Like, why isn't that 1%? So for employers who are working, employers with under 15 employees, essentially, that employer is exempt from having to pay the 0.5% share that an employer with 15 or more employees have to, but 0.5% must still be deducted, and that can come entirely from an employee's pay. We've also clarified that an employer can voluntarily, if they wish to, pay the 0.5% on your behalf, but again, the 0.5% can come entirely from your pay. So to try to break down again what the premium amounts are, and we know that everybody's wages are going to be different across the state, but these are just three general examples. So we use someone who's making about $35,000 a year. So on a per week basis, using the 0.5% wage, so 0.5% premium requirement, they will be paying no more than $3.36 per week, or $175 for the year. If you're making on average about $57,000 a year, it's going to be about $5.48 a week, or $285 a year. If you're someone who's making a little bit more, it's going to be $8.65, or $450 a year. The premiums for this program, I will also kind of note, that are capped at the Social Security wage limit. So, and that's a requirement by law. And again, we know that everybody's premium rate is gonna look different, kind of based on your income, but there is a cap on how much you pay a year. And so we're definitely happy to address any questions that come from that. So to try to break down what are the requirements and eligibility for this program. So there is a notice requirement that you as a worker will have to provide to your employer absent an emergency. And in terms of what reasonable notice is, we have tried to hopefully clarify in rule what is reasonable notice, but generally it would be about 30 days is reasonable notice, but that is pending the final adoption of the rule. And then you might be asking yourself, okay, what proof do I need to provide for the program? So this is something that we didn't clarify in rule to a degree. But one of the things that could constitute proof would depend on what type of leave you're taking. If it's for medical leave, that might require a medical certification. For other reasons of leave, the form or certification might be different. But we hope to kind of clarify that later in process of what proof is required before you start applying in 2026. And then also there's an income requirement attached to this program. So, and I'm gonna hopefully explain this in a clear way, but you must earn at least 6 times the state average weekly wage in 4 of the last 5 completed quarters before accessing the benefit. The state average weekly wage is a number that is published by the Maine Department of Labor on an annual basis right around summertime. So what we use for 2024 is exactly what the state average weekly wage is now, which is $1,144. So if you multiply that number by 6, and if you're applying, and then we look at, 4 of the last 5 completed quarters, we will determine whether you have hit the required monetary amount. So what I will say for 2024, while it's $1,144, that number might change in 2026. I just want to put that caveat out there. And then finally, the scheduling of leave must not cause undue hardship onto the employer. And again, this is something we've definitely had a lot of public conversation around, and a lot of people provided some great feedback about that. And we know that this might be, potentially a challenge for you as the worker, and also employers to navigate, as Maine is the only state in the country with paid leave programs to have this term undue hardship. So just wanted to be transparent that this is going to be a learning process, essentially for everybody, and we're happy to address any questions that come about that from them. So there's a benefit tied to this, because you're paying premiums, and you might want to know, okay, what's the benefit for me? So benefits are going to be based on a tier 1 and tier 2 system. So the tier 1 wage replacement is essentially if you're making at or less than % of the state average weekly wage, you're going to receive 90% wage replacement. If you're earning more than 50%, you're going to receive an additional 66%. And once we tie those two numbers together, whatever your 90% wage replacement is, whatever your 66% wage replacement is, that is your weekly benefit amount. The benefits are capped at the state average weekly wage. And again, that number is subject to change. So in 2026, that number might be a little different. And I believe we do have, yes, 3 examples kind of using the same salary amounts. So if you're earning about $35,000 a year, your weekly wage will be just over $670. By looking at that tier 1 wage replacement, everybody's at $514 because that is part of the formula, is determining what is the 90%. And again, it's all based on whatever the state average weekly wage is, and especially on 50% of that number. And if you're earning more than that, you're going to receive an additional 66% wage replacement. And again, we're going to tie the tier 1 and tier 2 wage replacement, and that's your weekly benefit amount. Just to provide an example of the capping of the state average, capping of the weekly benefit amount. again, is capped at the state average weekly wage. So if you are someone, after doing all the calculations, and it's like, oh, I should be earning, for example, using 2024 terms, $1,200 a week. Because the law requires us as a department to cap that at the state average weekly wage, it'll go down, right back down at $1,144. So again, we just want to provide some general examples of what the benefit amount is, and we know that as, everybody's gonna be earning different wage rates or weekly wage rates, so everybody's benefit amount is gonna look different, but again, we are gonna use that tier 1 and tier 2 formula. So, some other important stuff that you certainly need to know. There are job protections tied to this program and this law. So if you as a worker have been with your employer for at least 120 days, you are entitled to return back to that job with the benefits and everything that came with it, or a job that was equivalent to it after you've taken leave or when taking leave. So again, that's going to vary based on how many days you've worked for that employer. But again, there are job protections around this. And these benefits are portable. And so what we mean by that is if you are a worker, especially if you're working more than one job, if you leave one employer that is part of the state plan and work for another employer that's also part of the state plan, you don't necessarily lose your eligibility. I mean, you still have to apply for the program, and we have to assess whether you've met the income requirement, and and you're taking it for a qualifying reason, yes, but you don't necessarily lose your eligibility. And again, we won't be able to take applications for this program probably until early 2026, but we are certainly thinking about that now, so we can help folks get ready to start applying then. So here's what we would love for you to do. So the first thing is to review the Paid Family Medical Leave webpage. This webpage is constantly being updated and changed as we go. And so the website for this is www.maine.gov/paid leave. That's where you can find an FAQ along with the recordings of these webinars as well, and then any other information that you might think would be helpful for you to understand the law. And then finally, please sign up for our interested parties list. So this is where anytime the department has an announcement about anything related to paid family medical leave, we will use it through this means. And this is where you can stay up to date. If you go to the homepage, you'll see right in front of the homepage, it says a get notified box. You put in your email, follow a couple of steps, and you should be good to go. And then finally, frequently asked questions are available in 8 different languages. And again, we are constantly updating that FAQ. So we're hoping to update our FAQs in the available languages that we have. And you can find that on our webpage. So with that, we will go to the question and answer now.
We don't have a lot of questions actually.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And you can probably take them online, but we can take them in real time. But again, we just still encourage you to put your questions into the chat. So this question is, explain more about the state average weekly wage. So again, this is a number that is published by the Maine Department of Labor on an annual basis, and it takes into account wage data from multiple sectors in our state's economy. And so every year that number is announced, and that is how paid family and medical leave benefits are kind of tied to that. So, for example, that number, that state average weekly wage number, also caps your weekly benefit amount if you are someone who's potentially a high wage earner, and you in theory should be earning more in terms of weekly benefit amount, but the state law requires us to cap that. So again, in 2026, that number may look a little bit different, but that is how we calculate your benefits, and that's also how we determine essentially it's how we calculate your benefits. And that's part of our law, is using the state average weekly wage.
And then there's a question about private plans when the state is planning to approve them.
Yeah, so we are in the process of, again, finalizing the rule. But once that rule is finalized, that should hopefully kind of clarify, when the application process will begin. And we're certainly, doing our best to think about, potential FAQs to try to help, employers understand what is this process, because it is new. So we certainly understand that. And Luke, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything about the private plan piece.
No, I would just add that our second draft of proposed rules does specify that we anticipate the private plan application process for substitution to begin on April 1st forward. So everyone should be anticipating for preparing contributions for January 1st, 2025. We don't expect that to change.
Yeah. Awesome. So we got another question. So what are the rules on using PTO to make an employee whole? And then some states allow it and some don't. So we did, well, I know there are certain wages that you can earn while on leave that won't reduce your benefit amount. And look, I'm trying to remember if PTO was one of them. I know for medical leave, there's a 7-day waiting period, and at that point, you can use your sick time, vacation time to be made whole for that week that you're not paid. But
Well, I think
trying to remember.
Yeah, I think the question might be getting at supplemental wages, and we did allow for that in our proposed rule that if an employer wants to supplement the employee's partial wage replacement from the PFML benefit, and the employee agrees to use PTO time, because the law does require that an employee cannot be compelled to use PTO time under the PFML law. So if the employee agrees and the employer is fine offering wage supplementation, and so basically, if both parties agree, the employer can use, a prorated amount of PTO to bring that employee up to the 100% wage replacement. For example, if you have a high wage earner, and their PFML state benefit would only bring them to about 50% wage replacement, and the employee allows for the employer and the employer allows for the employee to use PTO time, the parties can agree to use the PTO time to supplement the person's wages up to the full 100% wage replacement.
Right. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And so are premiums paid on a quarterly basis? And the answer is yes. So the premiums and the wage reports will be due again on a quarterly basis. So that is where by registering through the Maine Paid Leave portal, that is where you'll file those wage reports and those premiums. So looking forward for January 2025, the first quarter payment won't be due until April at the earliest. So the next question that we got was, is there a difference between 120 days and 120 consecutive days when it comes to job protection? And that's a very good question. So there is, and we did put in our proposed rule that it has to be consecutive days. But again, it's pending final adoption of the rule. And so again, we certainly have a lot of time for any folks who want to pop any questions into the chat, and we'll be certainly happy to answer them. Thank you. I think we got one more comment. Yeah, I know that this was there's a lot to be learned about this program, so.
So the question is an employer required to continue to accrue ETO while employees add on paid leave?
Yes. So, when that employee's out on leave, they still have the right to accrue any benefits that they had prior to taking leave. And that's a statutory requirement that's required in the law. don't be shy. So we have a ton of time, but again,
There's another question.
Yeah.
So it said, you mentioned employers will submit report and the contribution quarterly
Mhm.
report will be census or something else.
what you said, report would be. Based on no, it'll be on, so when you register for the portal, you have to self-report how many employees you have. And that will potentially factor in how much you might owe in terms of premiums for that year. So, and we did put in our proposed rule, kind of how you count your employees. So your premium rate, as if you're looking at it from the employer's perspective, is gonna be determined on what you self-report, in terms of how many employees you have, and that amount will be due on a quarterly basis. Louis, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's asking about like the format of wage reporting, but there'll be kind of several different formats when you're actually in the portal and, come April 1st and you're reporting the wages. I mean, you can report individually, if say you're an employer of 12, you can go through on the portal and individually enter, your employee's name, social security number, and their wages for the quarter, and click through and enter it manually, essentially for those 12 different employees. Or if you're that same employer with of 12 employees, you can download an Excel file from our Mainly portal after you register. That'll essentially give you a spreadsheet where you can impute the same data points. So it's the employee's name, social security number, or ITIN, and then their wages for the quarter. And you can upload a singular file report, an Excel report. And then for companies that use a third-party payroll administrator, after you register for the Maine Paid Leave portal, you can designate a third-party payroll company to file on your behalf if you use one. And we are allowing for payroll companies to submit bulk reports. So if a payroll company has 50 different clients, they'll submit one file that has a wage report for those 50 different clients as one bulk file. And we've been sending around that bulk wage reports to payroll companies to prepare them. So there'll be several different ways to do wage reporting. You can manually enter for each employee. You can upload, if you're an employer, a spreadsheet, or you can use a third-party administrator to do bulk filing for you.
Great. So we got a couple of questions. I think it might be the same. So I think it might be getting to, what about employees paying the benefit costs? And I'm not sure it relates to the employer-sponsored benefits. I don't know if again, the law requires the employer to have the employee maintain those same benefits that they had prior to taking leave. And again, every employer is different in terms of what the employer pays for, what the employee pays for in terms of their employee benefits, but the law requires you to have that employee maintain those benefits.
Reggie, I think that last question was actually getting at the premium. So
ultimately,
it's the employer who's responsible for withholding the employee's portion of the premium, and then the employer will pay the state quarterly for all the money they deducted from their employees. And then if the employer has an employer contribution to add, they'll pay that as well. If that's what that question's getting at. It's ultimately the employer's responsibility to withhold the premiums and pay it on behalf of the employee. But yeah, you're correct. If it's about the accrual question, they're still entitled to PTO or ETO accruals while they're out on leave, and that's a statutory requirement.
Okay. And Luke, can you clarify about whether you said that the payroll providers have been notified about PFML?
Yeah, so we've been sending it around to the national consortium, the National Payroll Consortium, and individual payroll companies that we can think about. If somebody has a payroll company they're working with who has not been notified, if you could get that to the Maine Immigrant Rights Coalition, and they can send us a list. But we have been working with payroll consortiums for 2 or 3 months now, sending around what we're calling the draft of our bulk wage file specifications. And when those are finalized, and they may have already been, we're also going to post those to our website. Just if we did miss any payroll companies, they can go right to our website and download those bulk file specifications. But if you have a payroll company you're working with as an employer, and that payroll company says they have not been notified by about our bulk wage specifications, please email the event organizers, the Maine Immigrant Right Coalition, and they can get us a list, and we'll track those payroll companies down.
Okay. And I think we got another question about employee cost of their benefits. So I think it might be tying back to the previous question.
Yeah, and that's a good question. So the employee is still responsible for their portion of health and dental while they're out on leave, and the employer is still responsible for their portion. So let's say, you know, the employee has a health plan and the employer pays 90% of it and the employee pays 10%. Those percentages stay the same while the person is on leave. You treat them essentially as if they're working. So the employee is still responsible for the 10% they would normally pay, and the employer is still responsible for the 90% they would normally pay.
Yep, and again, these are all great questions. So again, will the employee still be responsible for paying a portion of their medical dental benefits while on leave?
Yeah, and that was that piece right there. That the employee is still responsible for the employee portion of their benefits, and the employer is still responsible for their employer benefits. It's not like the COBRA law, if people are familiar with it, that if you leave an employer and you take over your own health insurance, you pay the full cost. It's not like that. You treat the employee essentially like as if they're still working. So they're responsible for whatever portion of their health and dental they would normally pay, and the employer still pays their portion of whatever portion of the health and dental they would normally pay.
Thank you again.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you again for these great questions. So these are definitely things that we're thinking about. And again, we know that January of 2025 is going to be coming around the corner, and we also have it's probably a good time to plug the poster. We do have a poster available online about the program, and this is where, you know, these posters are generally hung up in every break room across the state. So this is where another way of employers notifying employees about paid family medical leave, and we would certainly encourage you, since it's available online, to post it as soon as possible ahead of when premiums go out, so that folks are notified about the law and then premiums. And then also too, as a work, I would certainly encourage you to read that poster so you can understand better, you know, paid family and medical leave and what to expect. And you can find that poster under the employer resources tab. Yes, the webinar will be recorded, so we will post it shortly after this webinar. So and we've also posted the other webinars as well. So we've done two before this one. So certainly happy to be transparent and keep those recorded, posted. And still seeing no questions. There's still more opportunity to chime in if you have a question. So we're not gonna leave if things go quiet for a couple of seconds. Seeing no questions. Still time? Nope. Okay, none are coming in. Again, we can give folks a few more minutes, and as we know, folks are been having a very long day, and so get to dinner soon. But again, if there are no questions right now, we certainly encourage you to reach out, you know, to the department if you have any questions that, you know, haven't come up tonight, but might come up in the next couple of days, and we'll be happy to try to get you a response. So, oh, we got one more. Great. Yeah.
Just read it out loud.
Yeah.
So during the time an employee is on paid leave, are they required to pay their portion of insurance premium to employer weekly?
They're definitely responsible for their portion still. In terms of how, that would be an employer decision.
Right.
Should I receive FMLA if I'm getting Maine paid?
So that's a good question. So by statute, FMLA and Maine paid leave is supposed to be run concurrently. And usually the employer designates FMLA time. But by statute, they do have to be run concurrently. So you have essentially 12 weeks together. You can't use 12 weeks of one and then another 12 weeks of the other. They're supposed to be run together. And so the state will determine eligibility for Maine paid leave, and the employer you will essentially designate your paid leave time off as FMLA as well.
And that also includes the Maine unpaid leave too.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'll just make another plug for that. Everyone should go to the Get Notified list of maine.gov/paid leave and sign up for our Get Notified list. So you have any information that gets updated on the website in real time. You'll get an email blast. So updates to the frequently asked questions, any press releases, any major announcements about the Maine paid leave portal. I'll plug again, everyone should go to maine.gov/paid leave. Scroll down to the Get Notified list, and you'll get an email anytime we update important information on the website.
We got another question that popped up, and this one is, does the employer get notified through the portal or approval or denial, I guess, of a benefit? And so, yes, so the employer does now will get notified. Anytime there's a reconsideration, anytime there's an approval or denial. That was something we heard in the comments when we put the rule out for the first time about whether the employer will be notified. And this might help the employer to navigate through the question of, maybe helping the employer with supplemental wages as well, or just have an understanding of what the claim is. And this is actually a good time to plug, not just the notification that we put in the rule, but anytime an employee applies for leave, and this is by statute, the employer will be notified within 5 business days that a claim was filed. So there is notification both in the statute and the rule that will go to an employer. There's still opportunity if folks want to put their questions into the chat.
So there's another question. Will Maine paid leave give my documentation to my employer to verify medical leave?
No, so there is a requirement in the statute that medical information is confidential, and the employer cannot compel the employee to provide that documentation. But Luke, I don't know if you want to add any more.
The only thing I was going to add is the employee should be doing a notification to the employer of their intent to use leave. And in proposed rule, we list out the things that should be in that notification, and it does include the type of leave. So you do need to let your employer know if you're going to be using, medical leave or family leave, the use of leave. So if it's intermittent versus continuous versus reduced, and then the anticipated schedule. So that's the information that the employee does have to share with their employer as part of the notification process. But in terms of any of the medical documentation that's sent to, us, the administrator of the program, the employer won't have access to that. That'll go to us, the state. But the employee does have notification responsibilities when they're taking leave of letting their employer know. So the employer would have access, to the broad aspects of what the schedule is, if it's approved or not, and what the benefit amount is, but they will not have access to the medical details that the claimants share with us.
We're gonna give folks a couple more minutes if there are no other, additional question. But we know that folks might need time to type too, so,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
I'll just take a plug too, because it sounds like we might have some business owners on as well. But we also, on our website, maine.gov/paid leave, we do have an employer resources section, and that does have the worker poster that employers are required to hang in the workspace. But also it has a one pager for business owners of what we're calling what employers need to know for 2025. So that's a broad stroke kind of document of what you need to prepare for as an employer, as you prepare for contributions in January 1st, 2025. So if we do have these small business owners or business owners on, maine.gov/paid leave, employer resources, and what employers need to know for 2025, one pager.
And we definitely encourage folks to ask any questions, particularly about premiums too. Because we know that's the first thing that's gonna be coming up. Oh, we actually have a raised hand. So, all right, all right, Melanie, can you hear us? For some reason, Melanie, if you can hear us, I'll unmute. Let's see. All right, Melanie, can you hear us now? Fortunately, we're not hearing you, but we certainly encourage you to put your questions into the chat so that we can acknowledge you. And I'm trying to. All right. Okay. Yeah, but Melanie, we certainly encourage you to put your question into the Q&A. Calling in through the chat. Alright, so hearing no other questions and seeing none coming through the chat, I guess we will go ahead and conclude for the evening. But again, thank you again for taking the last 45 minutes to be with us. And again, we will plug to go to our website, and that's www.maine.gov /paid leave, where you can find up-to-date information that is also evolving in real time. So again, thank you for everything, and hope you have a great night.